Welcome to Complexity Medicine, Align and Design. Align and Design is an interactive group discourse, discussion, and dialogue whereby we seek to mutually explore and create a shared pattern language and an implied design thinking process as it relates to health design, leadership, implementation, and integration. Join us as we seek to understand and apply primary patterns and first principles of engagement in the development of systems of care, connection, as well as means towards physiological and ecological well-being at scale. I am artist Andy McClure, and this is Dr. William Sutherland, your hosts. All right, welcome everybody to, I guess, our first official Thursday night, Align and Design. This is Complexity Medicine. We are continuing a conversation that has been going on for about 25 years between Bill and I. We really value that you're here, and we appreciate that you have come in and are joining us in this way. And I like that this way, because I don't know what this way is yet. I don't know. This might be a sandbox, or it might be a stage, or a ceremony, or a class, or all of those things at any given moment. Bill, I asked him yesterday, so what are we doing tonight? You know, what's our agenda for tonight? And he said, we're gonna talk about health. I think that'll be that our starting point. We'll talk about health. And then just before we came on, Bill said, hey, Andy, introduce the thing tonight, you know, what we're gonna talk about. and that precariousness, that getting pushed out onto a tightrope, is really an important part of the process of what this is all about. Is stepping into not knowing what you're going to say, not knowing where you're going, not knowing how you're going to get there. And that's really been, one of the most interesting parts of our relationship is the trust that we have developed over this time in knowing that the process of this will find new opportunities for conversation, new opportunities for insight, new opportunities for awareness. To give you some context, I met Bill before I had ever physically met Bill. I was teaching Bill's sister, and she said, "You've got to meet my brother. You're gonna really love him." And the first time we met was at a sweat lodge, and I think we met on the Friday at the sweat lodge, and I came to the sweat lodge on Saturday and Sunday. And we've been friends ever since. And she was right. She recognized some, I guess, pattern in her brother and in I, that we shared some similarities, some connection. And our curiosity has driven our explorations. I am the artistic side of the conversation. Except for when I'm not the artistic side of the conversation. I am a former art teacher. I taught for 30 years. And my initial process was that I actually wanted to be a doctor. So I went to university and I did all the sciences necessary. You know, I did all the sciences through school and I studied. And, before we came out tonight, I was thinking about sort of an analogy, because for me, the way in which I think, I tend to think in analogies. it was school for me was a lot like a Lego set. I got shown all the Lego pieces and taught the colors and taught how to measure them and how to weigh them and how to know them. And I memorized all those things, all those parts. And it never made any sense. It never made any sense to me. And during exams, there would be a question, what could you build with it? And I would say, I didn't even realize that we could build with Lego. And then I took an art course. And in an art program, they showed me the Lego set and then showed me a castle and then a cow. And when I saw the cow, I thought of my friend Johnny from elementary school who lived on a dairy farm. And I thought it'd been a long time since I'd seen him, and what a good relationship that was, and what a good friend he was. And that leads me to the present. The abstraction, the non-linear connection of things. I think Bill found me wandering around in a field looking for Lego pieces. If you're a parent, at some point in time in your life, in the middle of the night, while quietly moving between your child's room that you've checked on, you've probably in your bare feet stepped on a Lego piece, had that sharp, distinct pain, and tried to hold back from saying anything in order to not wake up your sleeping baby that you've just taken all this time to get to sleep. I think that's actually the real meaning of the word Lego, is actually let go. To let go. If you're going to birth something, if you're going to bring something new into your life, you've got to let go of something. It's a strange route to come back to, but as an art teacher, I started my classes often with saying to my students, I don't really have any answers for you. And if you came here looking for answers, you're probably going to be disappointed, because what I'm hoping to happen is for us to develop some really good questions together, for us to come up with some really good abstractions together. But I guess the first question I always asked was, what is art? That was sort of the first day's question. And today we're starting with that question, what is health? Now, in my class, usually the question, I led the students through a process where we came to an answer, and invariably the students came to an answer which was very open-ended, very idealistic, very emotional, and not very useful. And I wanted them to get to that place. I wanted them to get to the place where the question was so open that we couldn't find the threads of it anymore. I used to say that you can't get out of that box unless you understand what the box is. So we had to, put together some frame for ourselves so that we could get outside of it. And I guess that's part of what we're doing tonight, and part of what we're doing in this conversation is hopefully through a series of strange abstractions and nonlinear narratives take you to some surprising places. Does that sound about right, Bill?
That feels real right, Andy. And and on that note too, just as Andy checked in and said, does that sound about right? I actually want you all to sort of take a moment to check in and feel something. You can feel anything about that. I'm not directing you in there, but I think it's important that this is as much a process about understanding. There'll be lots of understanding, lots of things that we explore, but this is importantly about also rightness. Does it feel right? Does it land right? Are we creating something that isn't just sort of pragmatic, something that just isn't intellectual, but ultimately we're trying to create something that's aesthetic, that has a sense of rightness, that has a sense of beauty. And Andy, for me, that was right. And I'm thankful. And I'm also thankful for the honoring of our friendship. And I think that's a great place to launch from. And, over time, we're going to invite you all in to the foundation of that friendship. And as we look to build community through what this is, and that is the hope. This is just one Zoom meeting. This is just 2 hours. This is nothing. As a standalone, this means nothing. But what we build with this over time, the tracks that we lay down, and how we come together, trying to find a community of health. I think that's really important. And Andy, I think that was the great first steps into that. So again, I'm just going to do a little bit of the didactic here for a few minutes, and then we're going to get into some conversation. But let's give you a little something for what this is. And I think that's important. So this program is called Align and Design. And, with the elevator pitch, the short and the long, I said something about design thinking. I said something about pattern language. I said something about the notions of how we design health, how we come into health, how we implement health, how we experience health. So one of the things to think about too, just on a general level, and I don't even know what health is yet and how we'll understand it and where we'll go with that. But on one level for sure that I want you to think about is that the work that we do here, in a sense, is, in technical terms, what we call scalable or fractal. Right. So whatever the principles or the patterns of health that we're going to look to discover and understand and implement, if they are true from our perspective, they should hold true at the level of the individual. They should hold true at the level of the family. They should hold true at the level of the community. So, in society as a whole, and they should hold true at the ecological level as well. So the individual, the cultural, the ecological, right? Our individual ontogenies, our histories, our evolutions. All of these principles should be able to apply at all those levels. So if we're looking to engage health, to move health, to be moved by health, then part of this conversation is to recognize that no matter where you're coming for, what you're seeking, how you're understanding health in any of those levels, the individual, the culture, the ecology as a whole, then these principles should be unified, right? So they're not about specialties. They're not about silos. We really are all of a sudden recognizing that health is a holism. And so the things that we talk about and discuss and discover together, that's the test, right? That's the litmus test. Does it hold true at all of those levels? Does it align with all of them? If so, then maybe we're on the right track with this thing called health. So that's one thing. The other thing too is you're going to see that what we do is often backwards. You would expect that I'm going to come in with a definition of what we're doing or an expertise or some kind of thing that lays out, what do I mean by this? So we could put out the word of health design or design thinking. And for sure, we could take the normal approach and you can go online, you can look at books, you can look at Wikipedia, you can look at the experts, and they'll have a definition of what design is. We have designers here. My daughter, her classmate, my friend, Professor Sean Park, is a professor in design thinking in health. But what I'm going to do is suggest that we don't jump to definitions at all in the beginning. I'm not really interested what other people have said that health design is. We may leverage that, maybe we look into it, maybe be inspired by it. I'm more interested in a month from now, in a year from now, in 5 years from now, what we are able to define what health design is, where we take it, where we go with it. And so all of the propositions here, and this may be a little disturbing at first, they're all back-ended. They're not front-loaded, right? We're going to have to work for our definitions. We're going to have to work for our shared language. So what is health design? I don't know yet. And you may have thoughts on what you think it is, and you'll bring that. You're going to bring those experiences. But I want you to be able to create space and hold space too, that at the end of the time, it's going to be much different, much bigger than we imagined it could be. The same thing with this notion of a pattern language. This notion of a pattern language, the word comes out of the work of Christopher Alexander, who was a holist thinker in architecture. And forgetting the name of his landmark book, but it speaks, the word he coined was pattern language, as it relates to the patterns of architecture that he saw as universal, and that the different ways that they related together. So how is a pattern language different than our normal everyday language? The thing to remember about English is that it's very objective, it's very noun-based, it's noun-biased, right? So we see a world, because we've been languaged into this world, that sees a world of things, right? That's the language we know. We're strong in a world of things, objectively speaking. Of course, the language of science proper, although there's the notion of a complexity science as a holistic science, the language of science proper is very much objective, part-based. But when we're speaking of trying to develop a pattern language, we're actually talking about, can we develop a language that's relational, that speaks to the things that glue and hold the parts together? What is the language that grabs that? What is the language that puts us in that space of relationship? And there is relational-based languages in the world throughout human history and time, for certain. English is not one of them. And so part of our challenge over time is to actually develop a shared language, a pattern language of health. And by starting with health, we recognize that this is just a gateway. It's a gateway to all of the other holisms. So what are the other holisms? And there's always a sense I like to use of capital letter words, right? So I'm not talking about small h health. I'm talking about big H health. Wisdom, capital letter. Beauty, the sacred, wholeness, right? There's going to bridge us into all of these different concepts. And so part of this then today is again, how we understand health in all of these forms with all of our experiences from all of these directions. And so that's the sort of the broad stroke of what Align and Design is going to be about. I just want to speak to a couple of sort of tools that we're going to use in that. And one of the tools that I want to always bring forth is the notion of a metalogue. And this was a concept that was brought by the great cybernetic and systems thinker, Gregory Bateson. And when he actually wrote pieces that he called metalogues, not dialogues. And it was a metalogue for this reason. Whatever topic that they were talking about in any given moment, or whatever conversation was being written about, it wasn't just about the content. The form of the conversation had to also embody and relationally show the content itself. So if you were talking about health, the form of the relationships in the conversation had to exude and show and bring forth health. If the conversation was about love, somehow the relationships needed to be loving, right? If there was discord, somehow the conversation had to have discordance. And this is the level of metalogue. I don't want to just have dialogue with all of you. I want to push you such that we're embodying and reflecting the topics, that we're not talking about things, but we're talking from within the experience. So you're going to see that we're going to push into this notion of metalogue. The other one too is from the Asian tradition of Zen. Zen in Japan, Chen in China. It had different names as it went through the different cultures and the different languages. But the Zen approach had a really unique teaching approach. And this is of what was called the Koan. And the Koan was something that a teacher, the teacher would assign to the acolyte, to the student. And the thing about these questions is that they were meant to not bring about answers. They were actually meant to bring about great doubt. They weren't meant to bring about certainty and knowing. They were meant to bring the instability of unknowing, of ambiguity, of uncertainty that would shake foundations and break the walls of the boxes that had been formed. So they were meant to inspire a kind of creativity. And so the nature of questioning in the Zen tradition was always paradoxical. And there's great sayings in Zen, and you probably know these types of ones, and I'm certain you actually know some of the koans. So there's a great saying that said, for example, the Zen that was written about is not Zen. Or a statement like, open mouth, already wrong. These are great Zen lines. And then in the nature of the pure koans, of these sort of paradoxical questions, there'd be things like, who are you? What is nothingness? What was your face before you were born? What is the sound of one hand clapping? You've heard all of these things, and in some ways they become cliches or tropes. But when they were used deeply, the point of them is, it was not that there was a right answer to these questions. It was that in a moment of interaction, a moment of improvised interaction between the teacher and the acolyte, between the teacher and the student in that moment, that the proper tension was held by the question, by the paradox, that hopefully in that tension, a moment of creative rightness, living rightness could come forth. And that's the tension, that's the form that I want to invite us to use throughout these sessions. And right now we have them planned for once every 2 weeks, that every week we're going to be introducing a health koan, right? A koan that is paradoxical, a koan that invites everybody's position, a koan that invites opposite perspectives, opposite points of views, the difference in lived experience, and that we can hold that all in attention such that we find our way into a kind of rightness. And that the question isn't about a single answer, but it brings us to a state or a place or an understanding that holds us as a group, right? And so that's the koan nature of how we're going to approach it. And every week there'll be a new one. And I'll just give you some examples. The one today is going to be a simple one. I mean, and you'll almost not recognize it as a koan. And today's one is going to be, what is health? And I'm going to come back to that one in a second. But I'll give you some other examples of ones that might be upcoming so you get a further sort of flavor or sense. So I wrote this down. Act within systems. Don't talk about them. Or before you start, always begin in your preposition. Act to know versus know to act. Invert inversions. Alignment before intervention. Looked for and act on the motion present. Love one thing more in this world than your own self-interest. Each one of these is an example. And again, there's a countless number that we'll come into over time. But each one of these is the starting point and the launching point of where we're going to begin our conversation. And we're going to begin our conversation today. It is the place that is going to start to create within us, hopefully, great doubt, moments of uncertainty, ambiguity, such that we can create a system change. Now, another one for those, and I'm thinking as I'm looking at the screen, I'm thinking, Adam, where you're saying it too, we will be talking about the notions, the scientific notions over time of complexity in systems theories. Absolutely. But one of the things in that I also, maybe one last point, as I talked about metalogues and the Zen koan, is to recognize the power of metaphor. That we are always going to be shifting and changing and exploring all sorts of different metaphor. They're not all rational. Many are. And so one way I love this, a great quote of a great systems thinker and a cybernetician named Gordon Pask, and he was a master of understanding the nature of communication. And when somebody asked him to define cybernetics as a term, he said, cybernetics is the art and science of manipulating defensible metaphors. So we are going to go through looking at many, many metaphors, and we're going to test them, and we're going to push them, and we're going to see if they're defensible and how they apply in our life and in the world and the change that we're seeking as a whole. And then one last thing I want to say, and then I am going to step back, is this is a time that's calling us. These times are not easy times. These times have a call on us. We just have to watch the news, and whether it's in the anxieties in our own being, whether it's the stresses within our family, whether it's the struggles we see within the community, or and quite literally the existential struggles that we see, being presented to us now in the time that we live. This align and design process that we're engaging, in part, is, I hope, going to be our answers to ourselves of how we can be and engage those worlds, right? That we can participate and be part of the calling of these times that we're in. And so this isn't all about something that's in the head. At the end of the day, it is my hope that you're going to be able to take this into your life and in very real ways, see the application and the ripples that come off of that. But again, I'll give a koan that won't be for today, right? But it's aesthetics before pragmatics, right? And the one thing I'm going to say about all these koans, and you will see over time, and this came from one of my patients, where in our within a therapy group that we held, and that we did, we shared the same kind of dynamic, but with a different thing. We were talking about this notion called therapy. But I'll remember one of my patients said to me, she said, after about 4 years of meeting every Wednesday in this 2-hour-long group with my patients, and she said, Dr. Sutherland, it looks like you're talking about something different every time, but I realize now that you're always talking about the same thing. And she was right. Or we're talking about or towards or around always the same thing, but in a different way. And if you're listening and you're paying attention, there's a koan in there, I think, that we'll explore at some point, a health koan. All right, that's my didactic rambling. And I'm just going to turn it to just briefly to Andy in reply and retort. Andy and I love our call and response. There is a musical element that goes back and forward. And by the way, just so you know, because all that sounds kind of heady and heavy, there is lots of room for humor here. And if we ever so often shift into the slight edge of inappropriate, please excuse us. We're just becoming, ever so slightly demented and senile old men. And every so often we'll need a little knock on the head to, bring us back onto track. And but don't trust Andy and I to do that for each other. We'll go way off track. But with that said, I'm just going to just for a brief retort, and we'll get into hearing from all of you. Andy, just your thought on just knock that ball into your court.
Thanks, Bill. It's funny. This is such a weird process, because I can imagine in my little opening story, the quizzical expressions on people's faces, wondering where I was going or what I was saying or how it was going to begin or end. And normally in a class, I get to see people's faces. I get to see their reactions as I'm speaking. I get to feel the room. I get to know what is being heard as I'm speaking. That's a really important part of this dynamic. And it's something that we're actually going to have to sort of get used to, because the pace of your words, the way you say things, the feeling behind things really matters in this process. And as teachers, we talk about the teachable moment. There's this moment when people are ready for a shift. They're ready for a change. And it's hard to judge in this. I can only see Bill on my screen and a little version of myself here. So it's hard to feel as I would inside a classroom. But I liked the difference between Bill and I. I think part of my role sometimes will be to take my little Lego pieces and throw them at Bill as he's talking. Just to disrupt him, just to disrupt the flow of things, and I guess my cone to throw out there would be, what does health look like built out of Lego pieces? The word Lego means to play well, but we think of it in terms of these little blocks that form patterns, and these little patterns that become things in the world. Just as Bill said, I often taught my students that process was more important than product. Even though we mark the product, we judge the product, we critique the product. The product is this thing that occurs at the end of the process, but the process itself is really very important. And how we came to sort of put product over process is kind of an interesting story in art and aesthetics for another day. But process is really verb, and product is really noun. How we get there is really important. So a student that says, "Can you help me make a painting?" Sometimes the very best painting is a sculpture, or sometimes the very best painting is a poem, or sometimes the very best painting is to not do a painting. And it won't be until the process has come around and that something has emerged from that process that we'll know what it is that we were looking for in that interaction. And I guess that's part of what is going on here between Bill and I right now is we're trying to build something, and we're both unsure of what it is yet, and we're waiting for it to show itself, so that when it shows itself, and as it begins to show itself, we can be able to improvise and flow with whatever that is. And I'll just say, because I'm coming from a art background, my introduction to health, the reason I understood things differently when I began to take art classes as opposed to science classes was that in an art class, I was given a new language system, elements, the basic building blocks, the basic patterns of our visual world: line, shape, color, form, space, texture, value. But then there were the principles. And the principles are these nefarious process terms. They're difficult to define, and they are the roots of what we call composition. And they include things like movement and balance and unity and harmony and contrast, rhythm. Last night, Bill and I did a little podcast, and it was about rhythm. Bill was having a little heart arrhythmia, and it brought up this conversation about rhythm. And that language of movement and dynamics and contrast and harmony, as soon as I began to hear it expressed as a part of a process language, I recognized that that is actually the way in which I understand health. The way in which I think about health isn't about a linear beginning, diagnostic and finished. It is a series of expressive moments. And in art language, we work towards creating a composition. And trying to explain to somebody what a composition is a difficult thing. It is an arrangement. It has a focal point, a subject. It has a story. It has a series of interactions. It has a dialogue, a conversation that is going on between the elements within the frame or the space or the place or the time that it is being expressed. And it always happens as a dynamic between the artist, the work, and the viewer. And the composition is always different for the artist and the viewer. But the composition is always this process. There isn't an answer. It is an arrangement. And an arrangement that in its best expression produces ideas of unity and harmony. Often things that we come to associate with being healthy, with feeling whole, with being right. And so for me, that was the moment in my own head when I went, oh, this is how I understand it. Anatomy and physiology and the body and life. I understand it in this language, which was just a different way of explaining, or a different set of frames for me to understand it. I love, again, I can only see Bill. I can't see you. So, but I see behind Bill and I's artwork. And so I see the dynamics of that, and that, sort of grounds me here to this conversation with you. And whenever I can, I will try to throw things at Bill to get him from, being too didactic. That's my job.
Thank you, Andy. All right. So that's the introduction, and we're getting to the meat of it now. What is health? What is health? What is it? So I love etymology, and we're going to be doing every so often, regularly. I like to look to the roots of our words because they've changed, and it's always good to ask why words have changed. Sometimes words change for the better, often not, right? Words are a powerful thing. And you control the meaning of a word, you start to limit the possibility of worlds. That's a powerful control. When we start to expand and understand words in broader ways, and even better, we're going to redefine words. I mean, it sounds crazy, but at the end of this, as we go through in time, we're going to have our own meanings for words, right? Like we're going to have understandings that are not necessarily shared with, that they're shared with us, but they're not going to necessarily be universal. And maybe someday they might, right? As we introduce these new possibilities into the culture. But let's go backwards to where does this word health, what's its etymology? And remember, often when we're talking about our languages as far as they relate to English, we can go way, way back to what they call the Proto-Indo-European roots. So this is the common shared language of all of Europe and South Asia, right? Having come out of those initial migrations out of the Caucasus Mountains all throughout that part of the world. So these very ancient language groups. And then you find out that indeed, whether it be Hindi or Farsi or English or German or the Slavic languages or Greek or the Romance languages, we all have this common root. And so when we look into the root of health, and we see the related words, whether they be the related words from Germanic, English, Norse, or all of these other related older languages, we see that health is related to the word whole, it's related to the word well, it's related to the word heal, and it's related to the word holy. And that's not a mistake, right? That we see the sense of wholeness, sacredness, the things that are the most meaningful to us, that health has its root and its kinship with all of these other words. And again, over time, we will start looking into the relationship of health in the broadest, wholest of terms. But right now, just hold that triad of whole, health, and holy, right? So again, as we start to understand and get into this notion of what is health, there's the etymological root, our very base foundation of language. I'm just going to share a couple of quotes to start us off. I am proud to say I've already spilled my coffee all over my papers here. This is normal. And I have my quotes. So the first quote here is from Dr. Andrew Taylor Still, who's the founder of osteopathic medicine. And osteopathy in its original roots was a deeply manual medicine. It was a medicine of touch. And an amazing story, if anybody ever has a chance to look into the founder of osteopathy's life, a fantastic story of discovery. Again, in some ways of how we are, a fantastic story of what is health, how he searched and looked for the meaning of what that was in his life and the creativity, including a whole new type of medicine called osteopathy coming forward into the world. And his statement, and he was in the Civil War era from the States, so this is sort of the context of his life. And he said, to find health should be the object of the doctor. Anyone can find disease. Let me say that once more. To find health should be the object of the doctor. Anyone can find disease. Let that sink in. Feel that for a second. This next quote is by Gregory Bateson. Again, I mentioned him earlier. He is one of my intellectual mentors, and I will refer to him often. And he said this: pathology is a relatively easy thing to discuss. Health is very difficult. This, of course, is one of the reasons why there's such thing as the sacred, and why the sacred is difficult to talk about. Because the sacred is peculiarly related to the healthy. One does not like to disturb the sacred, for in general, to talk about something changes it, and perhaps will turn it into a pathology. Now, I want you to hear that because there's a warning in there. There's a warning for us in where we're going to go in this conversation, right? Words and conversation and discussion are powerful, and we have to be careful, not to take something and profane it, right? You know, when you talk about something and desacralize it, it's to create a profanity. When you have something that's healthy and we talk about it too directly or in the wrong way, we create a pathology. So let's say that once more so you understand the warning. Please hear the warning in his words to us. Pathology is a relatively easy thing to discuss. And be careful, because we're going to be talking about health, and you could slip into talking about pathology very, very easily, thinking you're talking about health. Health is very difficult. This, of course, is one of the reasons why there is such a thing as the sacred. Whoa, that was a turn we didn't see coming. Where's he going? And why is the sacred difficult to talk about? And you know that when you go to sacred sites, whatever the tradition around the world, they're often hushed. And if they're not hushed, then they're often absurd, but they're not in the middle. Because the sacred is peculiarly related to the healthy. And I gave you a little hint earlier when we talked about the etymology. One does not like to disturb the sacred, for in general, to talk about something changes it. You need to know that the minute these words come out of our mouth today, we are changed and start changing. You're already changing. We are already changing. We will change each other. Take that as an important responsibility. And perhaps it will turn into a pathology. So we got to watch that. I've got one last quote. It's more about reflecting what we're doing here, which is really, and I want to be really honest with this. We don't know. I don't know. Andy doesn't know. I'm going to invite you not to know. I'm going to invite you not to know what you're going to need to do with yourself, what you're going to do for the health of your family, what you're going to do for the health of your community, how you're going to contribute to the health of the world, because you can't know that yet. You can only act, and that's for another day. Act to know, another koan. But here's from Buckminister Fuller. There is nothing in a caterpillar that tells you it's going to be a butterfly. There is nothing in a caterpillar that tells you it is going to be a butterfly. You know, we are in a caterpillar world right now. Put up your hand if sometimes you feel that you're living a caterpillar life, that you are stuck in this caterpillar existence, right? You don't know. We don't know how we're going to make it to being the butterflies. We don't even know, and that assumes the caterpillar even knows what a damn butterfly is. It doesn't. It doesn't. And in the world, we're living in a caterpillar world. We don't know what a butterfly world is. We don't even know such a thing exists. That's all right. We're all here talking as caterpillars today. That's good. That's all. That's all. Show up as caterpillars. It's a low bar, right? It's a low bar. And we'll work our way to figure out what this whole butterfly business is about. So one last story, and then we'll get into hearing from you guys. So in the Ojibwe, in the Anishinaabe tradition that Andy and I have had the pleasure to partake in over the last, for me, 30 years, for Andy, the last 25 years with our elders and our adopted families, in ceremony, whether it be a sweat lodge or other types of ritual and rite, often there is this moment where people seek and are given a new name. They seek and they're given a new name. Why the hell would you want a new name, right? You got a good name. I see some good names here, right? Everybody came into the world. You were labeled. You have this name. It's who you are, right? It's objective. It wraps you up. Maybe it's a cocoon. Maybe it's part of the caterpillar business. I don't know. But the name that comes in a ceremony from the Ojibwe perspective, whether it be a sweat lodge or another ritual, it's not a name that's about who you are. It's not your name as you as an object. You're given a name to show who you are as a relationship, who you're related to and who is related to you. You might be given a name like Dancing Hummingbird. That's a relational name. Heaven forbid, nobody wants a name like Ugly Caterpillar, but that could come in a ceremony too. We all like names about buffaloes and eagles and majestic things, right? But sometimes they're humble names that come to us. But the thing about that name is it gives you a question for the rest of your life. Let's say we're given a name like Dancing Hummingbird. Why? What's your relationship to that name? What's your relationship to hummingbirds? What's your relationship to them as a living being? What's your relationship to them as an aesthetic being? If you understand the hummingbird, you understand their ecology. Do you understand the relations that they have and the relations of relations? And all of a sudden, a simple name places you in the world and the world with you. And when you're given a name in the ceremony, you're asked to say it back 4 times. When you receive the name, you're asked to say the name 4 times to acknowledge that you've received it. And in that reception, to acknowledge that you have a responsibility to those relationships as they now have a responsibility to you. So receiving a name is an important thing. And in that same spirit, I want you to receive the koan today. I want you to receive the question. I'm going to say it 4 times, and you're all muted, so don't feel embarrassed. In your own sort of spirited way, I want you to repeat it 4 times with me. As I say it back so you can receive it, so that we can understand how we can step into it relationally. I'm going to say it the first time. Here's the koan for today. What is health? Go ahead, say it. Say it inside, say it outside, say it out loud, whisper it. What is health? Say it the first time. I'm going to say it a second time. What is health? But this time, feel the reverberations as you hear it. Not just, oh, I'm a little shocked. He asked me to say it out loud in my head. Feel that in your body. What is health? Say it now a second time. Now, a third time, I want you to receive it differently. Not as you received it the first time, not as you received it the second time. What is health? Receive it with a difference this time. And I'm going to say it one last 4th time, and I want you to seal it and to understand that now this is going to be the beginning of our conversation today as we get to know each other, and maybe as we get to know ourselves a little bit. One last time, say it. What is health? As you receive that. All right. That's now some space, and I'm going to open it up. And our friend Greg Luneau, if you see him up, I see him up in the corner here. Greg is going to be our technical man today, and he's going to, Greg, as people, I guess there's a hand raising. Is there a hand raising function on Zoom, you guys? Is it? How do we do that, Greg? You want to unmute yourself and tell us how the hand raising function works? Or we could just result in it with utter chaos and all speak over each other. I'm good with either.
I'm looking for that button right now. I'm not seeing it. But
At the bottom of your screen, it should say participants. And if you click there, there'll be a few options for you. One of them says raise hand.
Okay, participant. Oh, yeah, the little button, the little up arrow, right? No, that's not
it. It says raise hand. It's a little blue hand.
Okay. Do you guys see that? You guys got it? Okay, I see hands perfectly.
It's different if you're doing a phone.
Okay.
On my phone, it's if you look at the phone, there's a more button on the right side, and if you press that, then there's a raise hand at the top that comes up. There's a list of options that comes up, and one of them is raise hand.
Beautiful. And if you're silent and muted and have no hands, then we could find lots of ways to get our attention. Dancing on the spot, breaking out into song. There's lots of ways that we can hear you and you can be heard. But let's start civilly with hand raising so we can hopefully maybe break this tradition and at least analyze where it comes from in time. Main thing is this. Here it is. What is health? And I've cast a stone in the pond. And now I'm looking to see what ripples out. There is no right answer. There is no right place to start. You start from where you are. I'd like to hear what is health, and I'm seeing some hands. Greg, I'm going to let you.
So Lisa left her hand first.
Okay, this is dangerous. This is my wife and mother together with a raised hand.
Please go ahead.
Unmute.
Well, actually, I was just practicing. I want to really engage, so I was practicing pushing the button, apparently. But,
good work. It was done.
But, I guess I could say something now. I'm unmuted. Is when I think of engaging in health, I was thinking of expanding my connections in every action that I do. So, or thinking about it that way. So when I'm doing my chores in the morning, it's not just to get those horses fed, it's to be in the sun, it's to appreciate the hay that came from the fields and the farmers that brought it to my barn. And I'm part of that cycle by bringing it in, feeding the horses, taking it out to the manure pile. Just expanding ripples all the time. Sort of like we're very parsed and segmented in our modern world. So sort of reattaching or resensing, like seeing, just trying to feel those ripples. Everybody that I meet that I know, I try to, instead of engaging in the same conversation that I do with them, like if I meet another mother, we always talk about our kids, or I meet somebody else, we always talk about, you know, how the education system. So I try to mix up those conversations now. Just try any topic, just try to go a different way to see what it brings, what some newness, and that's there. So I contributed something there.
I'm going to push. It's always
That's
hard.
great, Lise.
I'm going to push by 1 degree, just by one little bit. And so you started today telling us about the connections that you feel coming in and you feel going out, and that you experience every morning that you're with the horses. And again, this is chores, right? This is literally the time of shoveling manure. But this morning, to just make a small little transition from talking about to talking within, right? To talking about this experience, about this system of relationships, to talking from within it, Lisa. When you got up this morning, whether it was a smell or the sun on your skin or the movement of the horses, if you were to tell us that same story, just ever so slightly different about that experience today, not about it, but from being within it, the smallest things that may have evoked, and even just the remembrance of it right now, even if you just shared one thing in remembrance that was evocative, that brought something out in you, what was the one thing this morning that was special in that way?
There's this beautiful silence as I drive. It's there's a section of the road. It's only 4 minutes from my house, but it's completely flat. And on both sides of the road is very vast, open corn fields or wheat fields, and it's all snow now. And there's a beautiful sort of pink sky, and it just has this beautiful silence, like a blank canvas of the day, like just starting in silence. And you seem to always, I do start from inside you, like, and then getting in, embracing the world. Like you kind of sleep alone in your inner world, and then you just kind of expand out to your outer world. But it's that crisp, quiet silence, on the trip over there before I've spoken to anyone.
Thank you. And just again, this is one of those little awareness things, and Lisa caught herself, and we will all do this, and the shifting from the you or the general sort of comment, a third person or a second person, to the I, to the first person. That's important. Don't miss that, right? When you're sharing your experience, own it as that I experience, and note that catch. That was great. Did you feel the difference in your two tellings, everybody? Just, again, it's Zoom and it's hard, but for those that are there and nodding and shaking and moving, did you see the difference from about to within? And we're going to become more practiced with this, but could you feel that as a slightly different way that allow you to hear it? That's all I want you to note. Andy, as well, too, feel free to jump in our back and forth responses as we go through people's hands.
Yeah, I'm just actually I loved just the first part of Lisa's comment, and it was definitely, like I could relate to her relating, but what I felt in the second one was emotional, and so the silence, that little space of road of silence, resonated, and I almost think like at some points, the things that we say or the things that we do or the things that we see, some aesthetics, some experiences almost seem to, they vibrate with a bigger connection. Like you've touched the web in some way, and then the whole web vibrates. And so we all know trees, and we all know horses, and we all know fields, and our minds immediately came up as she was speaking with these images. But to say the road is really flat and there was silence. Silence has a weight to it. It's emotional. It's physical. It's experiential. Only the best artists leave space, space in their artwork, or space in music, or space between words. And that space is really powerful, like a breath, right? Like a pause. So yeah, I loved that. It's beautiful.
One last thing, because I know Zoom is limiting, I don't think we have to all critique Zoom and the inflammatory responses that Zoom is causing in our life right now, as we're forced to go to this nascent and early technology, and it will change over the coming years, and how we interact. But I want you guys, for those of us that are on screen, I want you to become very keen observers. I have this I'm on gallery view, and this small little picture of Lisa and my mom there. And as she was telling the story a second time, her gaze kept going up to the top left corner. Her eyes would rise and go up as she told it from within. And it allowed me to follow her gaze, to be with her on that windswept, open, silent road this morning, right? Even these little cues, even in the impoverishment of Zoom, there's richness if you look to track it. Greg, why don't you take us to another hand? What is health? What is health?
Yes. Olga is next.
Olga. Adam, put your hand back up. I want to hear from you too. I saw your hand earlier. Don't run from us.
I just want to share something that is actually built from your book, so you're familiar with this. But something you wrote is, if you try to fix the world, then you see it as broken. And if you try to help the world, then you see it as weak. But if you serve, then you see it as whole. So I think that approach is important in how we define health and how we approach that.
I will bring this reading on next time, but I'm going to give a gem to everybody. So write the author of these thoughts down. She's a palliative care physician named Rachel Riemann. She's a woman who's seen death, and she's also suffered in her own life. She's suffered with a lifelong colitis and multiple surgeries. And so she's a patient and a doctor. And she's a wonderful writer from these experiences that she's had in shared relationship with these patients. So I want you to Google these words. Her name, Rachel Riemann, I think it's Remen, and write in the words service, fixing, and helping. And there'll be a few different ones that pop up, some smaller, some broader. This is an excellent reading, right? That distinguishes that. So again, when we look at these two things, so what she said, right, is again, when it comes to health, and these are common things. So how many people have tried to fix things in their life? How many people have tried to fix themselves? And they've actually used that word, like, fix myself. Or how many people are secretly hoping to fix somebody else? How many of you would like to fix the world's problems, or your community's problems, or your family's problems? Who would like to have a fix? Who would like to fix COVID? There's a lot of COVID fixing going on in the world right now. Okay. These are epistemologies, these are worldviews, these are ways of seeing life. And the importance between fixing, helping, and serving is two are pathologies and one is health. So it's back to, it's easy to see disease. How do you see health? If you are a fixer, you see the world, others, and yourself as broken. All right. How many people are helpers? How many people like to help other people? How many people feel the need, the desire, the drive to be helpful? Go ahead. This is a chance to be unashamedly, to claim these things, with a little dance and wave. How many people just even want to admit just ever slightly that they've helped somebody and they felt good about helping somebody? Or the opposite, have felt helped. There's been times, the problem with helping is about a position of strength. which right away, that distinction brings its opposite, which is a position of weakness. So we help people from our strength. And when we are helped, it implies that we are in a weakness. And it's a problematic distinction, just like solutions and problems, as we'll see, is a problematic distinction. And so what it says is that when you are a helper, when you take a helping position, you're seeing the world, others, or yourself as weak. It's different than broken, right? Okay. Service is the last one that she'll bring up. And the notion of service is a very interesting one, because service isn't about fixing, and it's not about helping. It's not about our strengths and about our weakness, because we serve with the whole of our being. We serve with our strength and our weakness, our light and our dark, right? Our togetherness, our brokenness. All of it serves. All of it is in utilization. All of it is a service to the whole, and all of that whole comes back, and you are served in your service. And this is a notion of health and wholeness. And again, I won't go too much into it more than that, Olga, but it's a great reference. We may tackle, maybe I'll bring the writing next time and we can tackle into it differently. But think that's an important notion, right? Of how, again, what is health? And again, not just what, where is it? Is it in you? Is it in the other? Is it between us? Is it in the world as a whole? Is it in the past? Is it in the future? Is it right now? Is it up? Is it down? Does it spin around? I don't know. How is health? Where is health? Why is health? Are those even the right categories? Does it defy them all? And so we need to start to ways to shift and play with that.
If Andy's not going to say anything, we may want to go.
Yeah, sorry. No, I was thinking I had asked Olga earlier about, I just randomly threw a question out, said, should I want to know things? And she knew it was a trap, because she knows me, because I ask questions that I don't have the answer to, but I'm looking for interesting possibilities. And she said, not really. You shouldn't want to know things. You should want to discover things and fall in love with things. And that's one way to know things. That's just another way to know things. I think that's brilliant. She must have read some good books somewhere. Yeah, that difference between knowing things, understanding things, and synthesizing things, or loving things. I love using the word love in discussion of health, because I think of it, rather than just being a term of endearment or emotions, I think of it as a term of entanglement, a thing of relational connectivity. And so to know something is to be able to name it or define it, or put it down in a test. To understand it is to know something more about it, in a broader sense. It's conceptual, relationship to things. But to love something, because I think that idea of love, it leads to service, because it is participatory, because it is a totality. It's an expression of the sum and more of the parts of things. Do we have some other questions? If we don't have any questions, I have a little analogy story, but.
Adam is next.
I had nothing to say.
All right.
Move us along here, Greg. Yeah. And we'll come back to Andy's story too. We hold these things.
Is it okay if I use a story and an analogy?
Is it okay? Oh,
yes.
Is it okay? I mean, as soon as you gave us that invite, Adam, everybody, is it okay if Adam gives us a story?
Okay.
Yes. You're in the right place.
Yeah, I feel very at home. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Your analogy about the caterpillar and the butterfly actually made me think about some pets I had as a kid. We bought these 2 silkworms from a classmate, and then we brought them home and don't know what to feed them. So then we discovered there's some mulberry trees down the road, and my brother and I tried to climb the wall to try to pick at some leaves. But then later we just rang the bell. Anyhow, we were able to feed these silkworms, and they grew up. And one day they started spinning a cocoon, and we didn't see them for about a week. And then out came these 2 moths that apparently luckily one was male and one was female, and they laid all these little tiny eggs. And another few days later, they all hatch, and there's all these hungry little heads sticking out looking at us when we open the shoebox. But the next day, some ants came and kind of took them all away and ate some, I guess carried some away. And I'm getting to my point. So to me, health is to be able to be witness to that whole life cycle of our pets, the things that we love. But unhealth is when the ants came. And I guess health for me is a little bit value-based as well. You do have to, it's not okay for the ants to come. I'm not gonna say that's great for the universe. I have to say it's value-based, and I have the bias that I love the little baby silkworms. I don't love the ants. So that's it.
Anna, I love your story.
Thank you.
But I want you to imagine that somewhere tucked in the world are some baby ants, and their ant mother is tucking them into bed right now with full tummies. And their ant mother is about to tell them a story, a bedtime story. Now, it might not be their ant mother. It might be their aunt. It might be the mother's sister or the father's. But regardless, some little ant is getting a bedtime story tonight. Or even better, some butterfly larva. There's 2 kinds of story, right? There's the story that comforts, and there's a story that's not comforting. And by the way, in this day and age, you're not allowed to tell uncomforting stories to children anymore. It's fallen out of fashion, right? But if you look at like the old sort of folk tales, Grimm and beyond, they're really sometimes pretty dark kid stories, right? They're not easy things. They're not like Hansel and Gretel. Yeah, there's a big oven, the kids get thrown in and they get baked and eaten, right? Let me tell you a really ancient old bedtime story that's not that was a difficult one. And the story actually comes from the Bushmen of the Kalahari of Namibia and Botswana, which I got to spend time with and to live and work and with and to participate in this very ancient healing tradition in the Kalahari Sands. And the bedtime story goes like this. The children are tucked in, and Mom reaches down and she goes, there was once a time that our people got devoured and eaten by lions. Good night. That's the bedtime story. And you know what? That's a really good bedtime story when you live with lions. And so, yeah, so what I want to just say today is you brought out one side of the polarity, right? Which is the story that ends well and that's comforting and that you can have the likes and the dislikes. And I like that. That's the one side of the polarity. And I love how firm you were about it. Like, I don't like ants. I like those caterpillars. I liked how firm you're about it because it just so firmly invited us that the other story exists in this conversation too. And here's the great thing. You don't have to like it for it to exist in the conversation. I want to, before I get some, and I can only imagine that Andy wants to jump in on this one because it's juicy. But right there, as Adam told his story, I'm curious. COVID's not the only contagion in the world. As Adam was telling about raising silkworms, did it evoke a story in anybody else? Does anybody else have a contagious story? It doesn't have to be related to Adam's story. It only has to come from it. That something in his telling is evoking something in you. Does anybody have another story from Adam's story? And it doesn't have to make sense. We just want to have a part of you that's brave enough to share it. Any takers? I'm going to come back to Sebastian's hand and Andy's reply. Andy's replying to Sebastian's hand in a second. Any takers?
Allura wants to speak up.
Allura?
Yes, my brain was just thinking of raising little creatures, and I was thinking of our time with raising the monarch butterflies, and they eat the milkweed. And today I was actually snowshoeing, and milkweed, like once the season's over, it dries up, and the pods puff open, and there's this like really, really soft like fluff that's attached to each of the seeds that floats around. And so I kind of just stopped because I've been dealing with like chronic health issues, and a lot of sensations I experience are painful. So I'm really trying to notice other sensations that are pleasant. And so I stopped there for about 10 minutes. I think one of the hikers stopped to see if I was okay because I was just sitting on the ground and I was playing with this fluff. But I was just sitting there today, just touching it and like blowing it into the air just to experience another sensation. But it made me remember raising these monarch caterpillars. And the man who we learned about the monarch caterpillars and what they need to survive before we tried to raise them, he told us a story about the milkweed, and that obviously it was really important to their health and well-being because they needed this food to grow and eventually become butterflies. But it was very dangerous to people because he was working, it was a really hot day, and he went like this, and the sweat and the milkweed, the milk, I guess, from the plant also dripped into his eyes, and he went temporarily blind until they were able to remove that. And I just thought how like it's just a really interesting plant because I was enjoying it and the texture and the softness of it and thinking about how it brought life to these butterflies, but then again the dangers and the cautions you have to take around it as well. It's just an interesting complexity, if you will.
Andy. Lego.
Lego. One of the things that I heard in your story, Adam, was the relationship between you and your brother. And so one of the parts of the story that I'm interested in and that I would probably ask further information about. So you knew that you had to get certain leaves, but you had also been taught or learned that it was not proper to just go into somebody's backyard, to just climb a fence and to invade a space, a territory, without permission. That was wrong. And so you had a sense of right and wrong. And obviously, because you went with your brother, there was a relationship between you and your brother. And because that tree was there, you went and knocked on the door. And because you knocked on the door, you were invited in. And that idea of being invited in the right way, to be invited into, to participate in this life cycle, was probably really interesting for the owner of that house. The owner of that house, I imagine, is probably telling the story of these young boys who came to the house to get leaves for their silkworms, because that never happens, or maybe it does happen, but that's pretty rare. And maybe that person had a sense of loneliness, and maybe that was really important in that particular moment for them to share that space, for them to share those leaves, for them to share what was theirs with you. And then in telling the story, you have the moths in a box, in a frame, in a container, and then these ants come along without asking permission, and enter into this box, enter into this container, and take these things which have come out as a surprise to you, a mystery to you. And so the weaving of those two things, the relationship between the two moths and you and your brother and those spaces, there's just a really beautiful story there. And I think one of the reasons why you told it tonight is that you know yourself that there is more there than just silkworms and ants and those connective tissues in the parts is what's really, for me, quite fascinating about the story and about your telling. It's beautiful.
Thank you. I like it even better after you told it.
Adam, think about it though. It's a little story, but it's so rich and inviting and invading, giving and taking. The rising up and the falling down, of expectation and disappointment. That little story is deeply archetypical, like it's deeply human. I've got one question for you, and then we'll move to other hands. But Adam, if you had felt without any reservation and concern and worry, and I know it's out of both out of sort of how of time and balancing all of that, but if you knew that you had had one more full minute to tell your story, where there wasn't a sense of needing to rush to a conclusion or an end, that there was time to wander down some side trails. And it doesn't have to be 120 seconds or 180 seconds, but if you had 60 more seconds and you knew that you comfortably could have had 60 more seconds, how would that have felt for you?
Probably, I probably wouldn't have used it anyway. I feel like it's just wonderful hearing the feedback from Andrew about how to. Sometimes I'm more anxious to listen to the reaction than to tell the story.
You told a beautiful story. I want to just, again, so there's a really critical part, you stepping up and doing it. So if we're looking at a keystone of this whole experiment, and we can look at the koan nature of this at some point, but storytelling is keystone. And so let's all commit. So this is important, right? Because when we're telling story, we're not telling about something, we're within the story. We're telling the story from within the story. And let's all make a commitment right now that when we're deeply in the telling, that we all make space for that we're not rushing to another hand for a hand's sake, that we all pause to listen when a story shows up. That sounds almost a little, that word sacred and holy is sort of on the fringes here. It's on the edges of something here, maybe looking in, that storytelling might be something about that, and we could honor that. And Adam, I want you to thank you for setting us off onto that today and taking that chance. So my gratitude. And Greg, back to you for our hands there.
Yes. Sebastian was very patient, certainly.
Glad for these stories. This is not worth being patient for. It's just what patience comes out of, I guess. When you were talking about bedtime stories that maybe are too afraid to tell kids anymore, and when you were asking about health, two stories came to me actually, both of them from my school. My school is an interesting place, but the first one was with the bedtime stories. And there's a lot of stories we don't like to tell students at school, right? There's a lot of stuff we like to honor or celebrate, I guess, or remember in society. And yet when kids ask or want to know what it's about, we say, like, draw this poppy and stick it on you. Or we say, draw this orange shirt. So I don't know how many of you know about the like Orange T-shirt Day, but it's this thing where there was this girl, I think in the 60s, who was taken out of her community, her indigenous community in Canada, and was brought to a residential school, and was stripped of her clothes in all senses. I don't physically, but definitely I guess culturally, and this is hardly a rarity for people to have experienced of her generation. But that when she was much older, she I forget the actual story, but I think she tried to reclaim what she'd lost in all those years of being separated from her culture by just I guess wearing her dress again, her traditional dress. And probably telling this wrong, but what happened here was, in schools we have to draw an orange t-shirt. The students have to draw an orange t-shirt if they on this day, because this has become a thing throughout Canada. And so, picture this: I'm teaching kindergarten kids, and I'm an assistant teacher, and there's 25 kids, and the teacher, a lot of them it's a French school, but a lot of them are Anglophones. And so the teacher's just explained all of this in French to a bunch of kids who she knows aren't going to really understand what she's saying. And now she asked me to translate it in English and to tell them, what is this about? But just let's get to the point, right? We need to get them to draw the t-shirt. So now I step up and I tell them about, I'm like, how am I going to explain this to them? I have no idea. And so I tell them, like, have you ever had something really important that was part of you, or that you really cared about taking away from you? Like maybe a pet died, or you lost your favorite toy, or I don't know, your something like that. And we start talking about it, and they're kindergartners. I think you're often taught nowadays in school to delegate, and maybe this has always been the case, but to just get to the point. Later, after I told this and after they started drawing, I didn't know how much they understood, how much I understood, but the teacher kind of took me aside and was like, I'm not, maybe I'm just from a different culture here. She's Middle Eastern. She moved here a few years ago. But it felt kind of strange that, I'm not sure, I wasn't, are you sure that they're okay with that? She was trying to tell me that I should not do that, but she was trying to not, be aggressive either. And it was a strange interaction, because I remember when I was a kid in grade 1 and hearing my teachers tell us stories of what had been done to Indigenous people. And maybe I got lucky, maybe I had teachers who were okay with it, or a principal who was okay with it. But there's all these layers that fit into it, from like what a principal will care about in terms of, are we here to please the parents and make sure their kids aren't, saying things about what we're doing, or are we here to like how are we serving these kids? And that trickles down into how each teacher is going to interact with each other and with the students, and how this teacher is going to tell me this, but in not such an aggressive way. It's so complex. But I kind of told her, like, we need to, someone is going to have to talk about this with kids at some point. And to me, it's like a language. It's like the older you learn a language, the more foreign or the more exterior, the more you're aspiring to it, the less it comes out, And so I have another story about teaching, but that's related to health. But I think I'll leave it at that for now, because there's a lot there already, and I'd like to hear what other people have to think about that.
Andy, do you have a thought?
Thanks, Sebastian. That was great. I mean, I think what I heard was that you were given the task of conveying something that was powerfully emotional and complex. A shirt, an orange shirt, can't distill down the complexity of the set of experiences that you were having, your own, experiences in school, your own understandings, your own emotional experiences that you had, and probably the way in which those began to plant seeds of empathy and compassion in your own heart, right? You're being aware of others' suffering, often creates within you a sense of, wanting to serve, wanting to be part of that. I think, part of just connecting it back to our discussions around health, part of what I kind of hear in there is the tension that exists between trying to, to say something or to explain something in a simple way, which of course can't be, especially when you're talking about things, that are difficult, complex, emotional, and often the only way that we can connect and relate is through analogies. And I thought your use of letting the kids think about things that they had lost, or disappointments that they'd shared, was a great way to bring them in at the level that they were at. And for some of them, it might have been, a lost pet, or for some of them, it might have just been simply losing a toy or something. But they could relate to it at their level, at their place. So, it's really nice.
Sebastian, one word really that I want to harvest in the story was the woman's reclamation, right? Through her reclaiming of something that was taken and lost. And I don't want to speak on her behalf. I don't know what that would be like at all. But there is something, there's a notion of reclaiming, right? For example, and we'll talk about this as this goes along in this series of discussions over time. But I think before we look to say what we're going to reclaim collectively as modern people in these modern times, in the poverty of these times, which sounds ironic given how much material and technological wealth, but in the poverty of these times, the notion of reclaiming is going to be important. What do we reclaim? And particularly in terms of relationships and culture and many things. But before we go to what we can reclaim, I want to just reposition everybody and ask you right now, what has a claim on you in these times, right? We are all claimed by these times. None of us are observers. We're all participants in the world as it is. Something has a claim on us, right? We didn't ask for it. Most of us don't want it. What we're being, who we're asked to be, and how we're asked to serve in these times, and whatever that means. That exists because something has a claim. We can't speak about it. We can't speak to it directly. It's a mystery. But before we start talking collectively, and this is important because in health, we're going to need to reclaim many things to move forward as healthy individuals, healthy societies, in healthy ecologies. We're going to need to reclaim, and you're hearing a lot of words, rewilding, like this type of right? But before there's a we got to get really good with what's claiming us. And it might be fierce. It's back to the bedtime story. It might be hard, right? And to address what is claiming us is going to require courage. These are not simple times. These are not simple things, and they can't be sugarcoated ultimately. And so part of this conversation is to get raw, right? At times, like you said, like you just brought up, this is, the nature of reconciliation and what has happened to our Indigenous people, never mind the Indigenous people of the entire world, right? These are raw, difficult conversations, right? That we're digging into. And the fact that as a culture we can't tell difficult bedtime stories is part of that same pattern, that same symptoms of a diagnosis, right? So reclaiming. I would suggest don't look to reclaim before you understand what is claiming you. I see two hands, and I think the last of those two hands will finish us. Will get us through to today. Greg, I'm not sure who was.
Yeah, Catherine is next up.
Thanks. Yeah, I have two things. Relatively quick anecdote. First of all, Bill is on my dissertation committee for my PhD, which is about health systems in a time of social and economic and political change. And in my comprehensive exam, he asked me this question, what is health? And I don't actually remember what I answered. It was more the experience of being asked the question. It was the hardest question in the 3-hour examination process. And as a result of being asked that question, I decided to incorporate it into my research process. So everybody who I interviewed as part of my research, I asked, what is health? And many, many people were doctors. Some were various kinds of social innovators who work kind of at the intersection of health and climate change and climate regeneration in various forms. And nobody who I interviewed said that health had anything to do with the absence of disease. And many people specifically said that health wasn't about the absence of disease, that you can be healthy even when there is illness. But that health is something about being able to live well, and to feel meaning and life, health and life and a meaningful life were very connected for many people. And then the other thing that I was reflecting on is from the kind of perspective of systems thinking. And Bill, what you said in the beginning about things needing to hold true across different scales. I think one of the things that I think is true about health is that it requires, or in order for health to be present, there needs to be the capacity for a system to self-organize and self-regulate. So one of the things that is happening at the level of the planet at the moment, of course, is that the Earth's biophysical systems are losing their capacity to self-regulate. So that's what's happening in the case of climate change and other kinds of large-scale transitions in the oceans and other biophysical systems, biodiversity being another one. And when systems like that lose the capacity to self-regulate, what they're losing is the capacity to support life without any kind of intentional inputs. And I think that holds true I think that would hold true for the physical body of an individual, that you need that capacity to self-regulate. And I think it would hold true for a culture as well. And I think we see that in our culture, that our cultures don't right now have the capacity to support life in a fulsome way. They're not supporting equity. Inequalities have become completely unsustainable or untenable, and undermining our culture's capacity to provide the conditions that are required for life, which I think is kind of the foundation for health. So just some thoughts.
So Catherine, one I want to give, I agree. In many ways, I don't think of what the modern world is, modernity, these modern times as a culture, actually. I think it's an anti-culture. It's you remember the Never Ending Story? There was a movie. There was this huge dark void that threatened to consume the world in its darkness and voidness, and it just kept eating away at the edges.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a kid's movie with this really scary tone, right? That was omnipresent, eating away at the edges. And I forget the name of that darkness, but they named it. So, but here's an interesting, let's go back to the butterfly. And I agree, right? Like all of these things, self-organization, the ability to self-regulate, all the things that allow that to happen, right? This absolutely has to be something about health. And yet I want to put a paradox in there. I want to put something that just throws a wrench. And it's fitting that as we're getting near the end, it's where we started. And it was a story about that damn butterfly by Bucky Fuller, right? I'll read it again. There's nothing in the caterpillar that tells you it's going to be a butterfly. Right now, you know, think about how a caterpillar's life, and remember, caterpillars are caterpillars within. They're not without. They're not observers. They've never come in to their generation going, oh yeah, we know what it means to be a caterpillar outside, and this process that you get to see at a distance. Life is participatory. You don't get to step outside of the whole. We're always in it. And think about these caterpillars in our gardens. I know you want to create a garden full of medicinal herbs and wonderful plants, and I'm sure there'll be great numbers of pollinators and plants that aren't meant for our consumption, but they'll be in there for something to consume. And if you've ever had a garden where caterpillars show up, and in mine, the monarchs show up, and the eastern swallowtails show up, and the tobacco hornworms and the tomato hornworms, they all show up, right? And they start eating. And they're little tiny, cute little larvae at first, kind of like Adam's silkworms, just eating gently on the leaves of my tomato plants or my potatoes. And I think there's enough for all of us. And the next day I'm like, oh, look, they've eaten more and there's holes in the leaves, but there's still big leaves. There's plenty of photosynthesis to go around for my tomatoes. And I come back the third day and there's barely a plant left. And I'm thinking, gosh, not only am I not getting tomatoes this year, but I don't think I'll even have plants, because these things look like they're about to eat themselves out of house and home. This is self-destructive. This is unsustainable. This can't go on. It's going to have to end. It's going to come to a crashing end. It's crashing. This is not, by all accounts, a self-regulating, self-sustaining system. This is a mistake. Gosh, nature made a mistake in my garden. And there's going to be no tomato sauce for me this year. And I know Michael likes his tomato sauce. Might be no tomatoes in his garden this year either, if those caterpillars have their way, eating all of the plants. And then all of a sudden something happens. Some transformation the caterpillar couldn't see. Even the caterpillar itself must be worried at the very end, because there's nothing left, that's easily accessible to eat. And then one day it just changes and it becomes a cocoon and a chrysalis. And if all is successful, and that transformation, by the way, is brutal. They're literally, the caterpillar in its self-organization as a caterpillar is broken down to the protoplasmic level, literally to a proteinaceous level, proteins, muck, goop. And in that moment of that tight space of a cocoon, it's enough of a space that it self-organizes. And somehow it steps out as the most beautiful moth or butterfly you've ever seen. And I'm just saying that one of the stories in all of the race to the edge of our destruction that we could tell right now, and it's all true in what you said, can we hold space for caterpillars and chrysalis and moths and butterflies? Maybe it is our story. Maybe it is a 200,000 year story. Maybe it is a 2 million year story that is wrapping up such that something can emerge. And the other thing I want to do right now is I want to turn the tables. And I'd like to give you a moment to ask, Andy, what is health?
Well,
go ahead, ask him, Catherine. Dig it to him. Ask him, what is health? Go ahead, ask him.
What is health?
Okay, I'll tell you what health is.
30 seconds.
30 seconds.
It's your dissertation.
Health is you talking to us about the things that are on the wall behind you. You're leaning against a tapestry, a wallpaper. It looks mirrored, a fractal, images from nature, plants, and all of that. And as you were talking, I just kept looking at the apple, or the reflected apples that had been bitten into, that it had been, that a bite had been taken out of it. Here's the Garden of Eden. The Garden of Eden, unchanging, eternal, perfect, lovely, rhythmic. And then there's a bite out of it. Chaos, disruption, uncertainty, contrast, silence, death, ants, everything. I'm picturing myself as a caterpillar, phoning Bill. It's 11 o'clock. Bill, my leg is starting to melt. I hate to call you. I know you're a friend.
That's never good.
Yeah,
Andy.
I know you're a friend. But is that bad? Is that bad?
Oh, that's got to be bad. A melting leg? That can't be good, Andy.
That's got to be bad.
That's got to be bad.
Yeah,
Adam,
no.
We've got a family doctor
You'd
here.
say,
Adam, a melting leg? That's bad, right? That's bad. We don't like melting legs.
Okay. What about 2 melting legs?
That's worse. 2 melting legs would be bad for a caterpillar.
At what point would you tell me, Andy, I think you're dying?
I'm certain of it.
Now, if the word dying to me means change, then Bill has just said to me, you're becoming something else. And I don't know what that is. And so now I'm going to be filled with a choice of emotions. And one is going to be uncertainty, that is the expectation of mystery. And one is dread. One is contraction, and one is expansion. And in the moments of my conversations back and forth, I'm probably going to be moving back and forth between those 2 things. Experiencing that full range of things, not knowing. But I know Bill, and Bill would probably say, you're dying. And then he would say, so what is death? Because he wants to spark a conversation, a dialogue, because he's aware that the self-regulating system is doing the thing that it needs to do in order to find new stabilities. And not stabilities that are stuck like the garden, but stabilities that create dynamics like the painting behind him. Change is going to come into it. Things are going to happen. The unexpected is going to occur. But if I am looking for patterns of beauty, patterns that resonate with me in truth, patterns that I can connect to, patterns that resonate in that web of things, then that's what I'm going to find. And, I think one of the things that we're doing here is we're trying to put out their beautiful stories, because if those beautiful stories, if you can connect to them, then you're starting to look for them. And as you're starting to look for them, you will see them all over the place. You'll find them in unexpected ways. That was more than 30 seconds, but beginning.
All right. Greg, is Nicola's hand still up? She just popped out of my screen.
Nope. No more.
Nicola,
hands.
would you like to still jump in?
I can bow out for this time. Thank you.
Are you sure? Because we'll make time.
I'm happy to contribute, but I think I'll save it for for next time and just honor everybody's time here. Really enjoying this. So thank you.
And Alex, I know you had a hand earlier. Is there one thing I just want to say, Alex, that I've really appreciated? I've been watching you move throughout these 2 hours, and I love because your movements are like you're listening to jazz. You've had this great you've got this great, and you're responding like, and our aim is that this would somehow be conversational, dialogic jazz. And here I'm seeing you moving in that. And I got to tell you, I'm very grateful to see your jazzing in this. And I know you had a hand up earlier, and I just wondered if there was any last thoughts that, that are of those moments passed you by, or if they're live in you and Embers to restoke.
It's passed by somewhat, but I think I can fit it in here again. I was struck by a phrase that Sebastian said when he was talking about his story, that he said, let's get to the point. Let's draw the orange shirt. And without that language that he was talking about of our history and of reclamation and of health and of everything else, that orange shirt is just a completely absurd symbol. It's an orange shirt. It doesn't mean anything without the story of our human interwoven experiences. It's just not even an orange shirt. It's a picture of an orange shirt on a piece of paper. It's a bunch of lines and colors that together are just a jumble unless you have all the pieces that you need to put it together into an orange shirt that we can all relate to. So I think that embracing some of those absurdities to start with, and then trying to piece together, well, what relations do we need to make sense of this? I think that would be a good place to start for us as well. What things do we see that appear absurd, but we can really find sense to eventually?
We're going to find so much sense in the nonsensical. There is so much space for absurdity. And I just want you to thank you for reminding us.
Alex gets my Lego.
There's always the Lego. And then to remind us that the point of any point is rarely the point. We get stuck on these obsessions of points, and points are best, when they get you in the foot with a piece of Lego. Are there a sharp stick to draw the symbol that means something richly, rather than a point for its own pointy sake. Thanks for jazz, sir. Thanks for the jazz. All right. I want to honor the time. I want to take Nicola's lead in her honoring of the time and all of our times. And I think that's important. And I just want to speak to, this is great. Here is first and foremost, what do I hope for in this? Exactly this. Thank you. I'm nourished. This is what I have been craving, is this process in community. So thank you all for showing up, and really hear the gratitude for what you, and I'll speak for Andy and I, because I know it's true, what you've given us, and hopefully what you've given each other and what you've given yourselves. And so let me end with gratitude. And I want to say a little bit just about just a little bit of housekeeping at the very end. But Andy, any last sort of thoughts on any last moments of just concluding thought or gratitude?
You froze for me. Are you?
Oh, did I freeze for you? Because it was perfect. I just thought that you were engaging us in ferocious
were you waiting for me to say something?
Yes, and you engaged us in this moment of ferocious silence.
No. Well, think of it as like a strip on the road that's perfectly paved. Okay, I'm going to finish with this quick little story. Fabian, one of our elders and teachers, this is Fabian would say, Andy, can you go grab my medicine? So I'd go get the medicine and bring him his medicine. And he'd say, no, my medicine. So I'd go back and I'd get him his medicine, blueberries in a bowl. And he'd go, no, Andy, my medicine. And so then I would come back and I'd get him a different bowl. And this one's got 4 walnuts in it. And he'd, no, get me my medicine, my medicine. And it didn't matter what medicine I brought. It was always the wrong medicine until it was the right medicine. And and that's where I'm going to leave it.
And the right medicine was often a Pepsi. All right. Last little thoughts on how we keep this going. First and foremost, if you have it in you, keep coming back, because this is something that builds and grows over time. And when I mean time, weeks, months, years, that's what we're looking here. Something that, that we're putting our time in to nurture something. That's the most important thing. The next thing is, bring others. If you're excited about the conversation, invite others in. We'll make room around the fire, right? For others to join in on the conversation, the storytelling, the story listening, which is very important. It's not all about just the telling. It's about how do we receive the other's story. And you did a great job with that today. Thank you. There is the material realities of life. So again, how does it help get out? We got Facebook, we got it all. We got Facebook, we got YouTube, we got these things. And by the way, these will be archived. So if you miss them or miss any one, we can go back and it will be there. But do the whole, classic, like, subscribes, blah, blah, blah. That is helpful. Shares, that kind of thing. And the other one too, just in terms of, and again, it doesn't have to be every time, every day, or any of those things, but in terms of the financial support for this broader complexity medicine project, there's a couple of easy things to do right now. There's always, there could be at any time just simply donations by PayPal. If you go on our site, the complexitymedicine.org, www.complexitymedicine.org. There's a support page all set up. More importantly, the one that we like is that we've actually set up something through Society 6 where our art is available to be seen. And we got to go in and take some of the tacky stuff off. It just sort of did a blanket thing of, pillows and throw rugs. But our prints, our posters, I kind of like the coffee mugs. They're sort of fun. Without being crazy materialist, but it's there to enjoy art in your life, and we want to share the art. And that's actually doubly warming for us because it means that our art has got out in the world, and hopefully it has meaning and touches you as it has touched us. And in time, there'll be, there's a Patreon-like site called locals.com that I'm looking to build and develop and in the process of, but these are early days. None of this really matters too much at all in the beginning. Like I said, it's your faces that matter most. But the notion of supporting a back to what Catherine said earlier about our self-sustaining and self-regulating, ultimately, those notions in an applied sense to keep this going are actually really important considerations and broader templates as we look to support a new world in different and new innovative ways. And so anyway, I'll leave that there. They'll be there for this if you want to come back and hear it again in a different way. It will be online shortly. And any that you miss will be there. And I really do look forward to seeing you all again. And again, just want to end with that notion of gratitude. And so with that, I'm going to wave to all of you and wish you a good night. And we'll be back in the exact same place and same time 2 weeks from now with a new koan, always talking about the same thing in a different way, never directly, honoring that which can't be spoken of in the ways that we can speak about it. And again, I just want to one last thing. It's hard for me to leave. It's not, I've got literally goosebumps right now. I am feeling these 2 hours and the contribution and the sharing. And I'm looking at Alex's jazz as he continues to move in, and I just love it. And I'm going to say thank you, from and for that. And so thank you so much. All right. Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, Willie.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.